Hello everyone. Previously we set up the text-to-speech AI here where you would enter some text, click on generate voice. That would fire off to ElevenLabs where we have a bunch of different voice options, and I made a custom voice that is just my own voice to respond to stuff, maybe to outsource my job in the future. And then it would use that voice in the API to read the text that we entered and then generate an audio file based on that. We then stored it in active storage, attached it to a model, etc. I'll have a link to that video in the pinned comment. But this time what I want to do is I want to replace it from just reading the text that is inputted into here into first generating a response using OpenAI, then returning that text, and then sending that text over to the text-to-speech bot, and then sending that response back in an audio file format. So we're asking it a question and we're receiving an audio response. So we're stitching together quite a few of these APIs. So hopefully we can get something like that. Let's just go ahead and let's say, is it colder in Canada than in Mexico? Mexico on average. Just gonna ask a random question. I'll click on generate voice, but I'm gonna move it up here first. So we'll click on generate voice. I'm just doing this so that we can see the terminal fire off. And then we go through here, all of this runs through, and then if I click on that question, it just responds with the word yes. Fantastic. Okay, so clearly not the best question to ask, but that is correct. So that's something at least. And then, there's other things you can do. Like I asked it to be nice to Jared, and it said something along the lines of, "You're doing great, Jared." So let's go ahead and let's see how we can actually stitch this together. For this, we're going to be using the repository from the previous video, just because it already has the ElevenLabs set up with the Faraday gem being used to communicate to that API endpoint. And then we'll just go from there. So the first thing we're going to want to do is go over to OpenAPI, click on our account, and I think we want to view API keys. And then in here, you're just going to want to create another API key. So once you've done that, I'm just going to go ahead and clear this one because I'm not using it. Once you've done that, you should have something pop up that allows you to copy the API key. Like we can just do test key real quick, click on create secret. You just click the copy button, and then you can take that and paste it in. So I'm going to go ahead and revoke that one, and then we can come over here. So once you have your API key, you're then going to want to come into your application, which in my case is this video application here. And we just want to do a editor equals code dot dash wait inside of quotes with a Rails credentials : edit command right here. If I zoom out a bit, just like this, we can then run this, and then this should open it up in VS Code for us, which just makes it easier to edit. Once you're in here, you're going to have like your or your XI API key from last time, hopefully. And then we'll just say, all right, now we want to do an open API key, which we're just going to set to whatever text we just copied from here. And then once we have this set up, we should then be good to use both of these keys. Just make sure you generate your ElevenLabs API key, like we covered in the previous video, and then your open API key as well. Okay, once we have that, I'm going to go ahead and actually close out of this demo window. Okay, once you have that, and then your terminal starts responding again, basically all we really have to do here is come into our app, our jobs, and our text-to-speech job, and just kind of reconfigure the logic in here. Because we're pretty much doing the same thing we did last time, we're just modifying how we're doing it a little bit. So the first thing we want to do, we have this prompt right here. I'm actually going to full screen this so that we can just focus on this file. We want to take this prompt and we just want to sort of have ChatGPT limit itself a little bit. So I'm going to take this prompt and I'm going to convert it into a prompt with instruction, which is just going to say this is a question that requires a single answer with a new line, and then the question itself, and then another new line. I'm trying to get it to only respond to the question once because I've had it respond almost like a text completion answer. Like if I were to say something like the sky is and send it, it would then say blue, and then it would continue to guess what the rest of the response should look like. And I'm not looking for it to act like a completion engine. I'm looking to make it act more like a question and answering session. So that's why I start with this prompt right here. We then have this Faraday request right here that we're sending off to the ElevenLabs whatever thing. We're going to take this and we're actually going to move this a little bit. So for this, we're going to make another method down here. We're going to call this the send text to speech request. We're going to pass in the GPT text once we get it, and then we'll just say end right here. And then we can actually just take this whole thing right here and just move this into this method. Now we're going to have to do a little bit more here to sort of clean this up. The first thing we want to do, this is going to be our GPT text that we get back. We're going to replace this prompt right here with that GPT text. And then for our body here, we can sort of change the voice settings if we want to. We do want to make sure we're on the model ID of whatever this is. And then you want your own custom model number right here for whatever your voice is. So we have this now. This is fine. And this should work for our purposes. We actually don't need to create this response because we're just going to be returning this up here. So we get this prompt with instructions. We then say, let's do something this. We'll say GPT response is equal to send prompt to OpenAI. And then we want to pass in this prompt with instructions. Then we're going to take this GPT response and we're going to send this to the text-to-speech request. But our GPT response, if you actually look at it, I think I have it open over here. The way that this response sort of looks, or what it looks like when you get it back, is going to be, it's going to be like a nested JSON object. So we're going to have to actually process the data we get back a little bit. So between this audio response, what I actually want to do is I want to say something like GPT text is equal to, and then we're going to say parse GPT response, where we pass in the GPT response. And then we're going to pass this GPT text into this send text to speech request. And then for both of these, what we're going to do is we're just going to say create audio file, where we pass in the response as well as the original prompt. We can just do that down here real quick, where we say create audio file with those two parameters. So those response and prompt. You can hit enter, paste this in, and then hit end. So this is just sort of cleaning up our code a little bit because it kind of drives me nuts to see this stuff. But now let's take a look at what we actually need to do here. So for our audio response, we need to pass that in. And now we effectively have the code logic here perfectly outlined and encapsulated, right? We start with our prompt, we talk to GPT and parse it, we then convert that to audio, we then save that audio, and then we're good. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at the send prompt to OpenAI thing. So let's start with that. We'll say send prompt to OpenAI. This takes in a prompt with instruction. And then in here, what we want to do is another Faraday post, but this one's actually going to go over to, I believe, this URL, which is just https api.openai.com/v1/chat/completions. Then we can do a request. And then for this request, we want to set the headers. So request.headers is going to be authorization. So this is our authorization header, which is of course going to be our bearer token, which we're going to get from rails.application.credentials, and then whatever you called your API key in here. In my case, I actually just called it Open API key, just for reasons, I guess. We're then going to give this a content type, and then finally we're going to say this is going to have a request.body, and this is going to be a little bit involved because if we look at the view code for this, you can see we get like a whole response or a whole object we have to build here to make this sort of work, right? So let's take a look at how we need to do this. So for our body, we're just going to say this is going to be equal to a body for GPT, and then we'll pass in our prompt with instruction. And then we'll do that down here, body for GPT, prompt with instruction. And then down here we can say this actually needs to return an object, which we'll call .toJSON on. And then in here, we can do something like this is going to use the model of GPT-3.5-turbo, which I'm getting from over here. The model right here is indicated as a GPT Turbo. That's what I'm using. After we have the model, we then need to say, here's our messages array. Our messages array has an object in it, and each one of these messages has a role, which in this case is just going to be a user. And then it has content, which is going to be the prompt with instruction. So basically what we're saying here is, GPT, I'm giving you a list of messages from a user with this content. And the content's going to be the questions that the user is asking, and then GPT is going to respond to these. We're going to limit the max tokens it can respond with to something like 50. Each token is a word. Tokens equal words. So we're just saying only use like 50 words because we only have so many characters for the audio parsing thing. This one works based on characters. You can see since my video last night, I think I've used like 2,000 or 3,000 characters already. So like this will add up pretty quick with your costs. So just while you're testing it, keep it very limited. We'll then give it a temperature. Now this is going to be like the randomness. So I'm going to move the temperature down instead of the 0.9 it suggested. I'm going to go down to 0.1 so it can be a little bit random, but mostly I want it to be correct. We're then going to give it a top P, which I can never remember what that does. But if I hover over it, it says it controls diversity via nucleus sampling. 0.5 means half of all likelihood weighted options are considered. So it's just, you know, we'll leave it at 1. We won't go with any sort of likelihood at all. And then we'll say it has a frequency penalty and a presence penalty of 0. These can all be tweaked, and you can go over to their playground to mess around with these to see like how this works. So that's going to give us our body for our GPT response. So now we have our body being parsed here, right, with our parsed GPT response, which we're still not actually doing. So if we collapse these, we can see we have the send prompt. We now need to parse the prompt. So let's do that right here. Actually, let's do that after the body because that just makes sense. We'll say parse GPT prompt. And now for parsing this prompt, we have a couple of things that can happen. We're going to say if the response is 200, else end. So if the response is 200, or let's say the response is an error, right? We can then say, you know, puts error, this didn't work, and then we can return nil from this, from our parse response. And then right here, we can actually do some error handling where we say like return unless GPT text, just as a bit of a guard so that we don't send some more stuff to our API endpoint here because we really don't need that. But in most cases, what we're actually going to get is a status of 200, which means we can do a JSON.parse for the GPT_response.body is what we're going to get. We then have to dig into what we get back, which I think over here, if I click on view code, I full screen this and I zoom in a bit, you'll see sort of what we get here. I think it's this one, right? Actually, this isn't what we want. We want to come over to our API, I think. We'll go over to the API reference. I think it's chat. This is what we're looking for. We're going to get a choices array back. Each array object or each array element is an object. And then inside of the choices, we want to grab the first option, grab the message, and then grab the content from that. So let's go ahead and let's take a look at how we do that. So we have the body right here. Let's grab the choices. We want to grab the first item from those choices. Then we want to grab the message, and then we want to grab the content out of that message. And then that'll allow us to parse that response. We can then send that to the text-to-speech request, which we've already constructed here. After we get the text-to-speech response, we can then create the audio file, which is going to do the active storage attachment, and then just create the audio file for us. And now, assuming we set all of this up correctly, which is always a bold assumption, we can run a bin/dev to start the server using bun as we were in the previous video because we're on the 7.1 release candidate. And we can refresh this. And now I'll just do some message or some question. I'll say, how do you feel about YouTube viewers reading this response? I don't know. We'll just send it some nonsense. We'll click generate voice, and hopefully that will fire something off in our terminal here.
As an AI language model, I don't have personal feelings. However, it is generally positive for YouTube viewers to read and engage with responses as it promotes communication, knowledge sharing, and community interaction.
All right, well, that was a oddly wholesome message. It did interrupt me though, which was kind of rude. But we can see here, we insert all the attachments, do the audio stuff. We then grab everything we need to. We do the turbo broadcast that updates the page without needing to refresh. Now we do initially refresh the page just so that it clears the form because that was the laziest way to do it. But this is actually being prepended using turbo inside of our audio, model. So all of this is pretty cool. This you could sort of see where the use cases for this might come up. That said, as always, don't do this just because it's cool. Do it if you have an actual reason to. Because I mean, first of all, like the complexity of this, you got multiple APIs communicating, kind of overkill, and also the cost of this, you're hitting multiple API endpoints like repeatedly. So like if you have a actual business case for this, where this can help you, make money, convert clients, assist your customers or whatever, improve their quality of interaction with your service, then it might be worth it. But don't just do these things because you can, because there's no real selling point to, oh, my app has, text to speech that uses my voice and GPT. Think of what the product you're trying to sell is, and then maybe if that product could benefit from this, then it's worth doing. Otherwise, don't just cram AI into something just because you can. And also, if you're using this, again, the ElevenLabs, make sure it's a voice you have permission to use. It's really cringe to just go steal like a voice actor's work. So just make good choices there. But that's enough for me. Hopefully you found this informative and helpful or entertaining, and hopefully I will see you in the next one.